Hello everyone, Chris Whitten here, welcome back. So today I want to go ahead and do part 2 of my video speaking about traveling abroad or internationally. I decided to break this video down into 3 parts and talk about 3 very distinct regions of the world that posed some very unique circumstances and just share a few stories about some of the things that I've encountered in each of those 3 regions. So without further ado, let's dive right in. So firstly, let's talk a little bit about Europe. I'm going to start by talking about London, and in particular about Heathrow Airport. You know, I'd prefer not to be laid over at an airport, but if I am, Heathrow has to be one of my favorites. There's a lot of shops, and there are just a lot of things there to see, to keep you occupied if you're stuck there. I think the longest layover I ever had in Heathrow was about 12 hours, which is quite a while to just kind of bum around at one place like that, but there was plenty to see. Also went into one of the little sleep lounges, kicked back on one of their little chase lounges, took a nap. It was really nice. As I talked about in the last video, my fiddle being lost there one time aside, I remember a couple of little hiccups that we had at Heathrow Airport there in London, both going and coming back on the trip to Iraq. On the way over, when we went to change planes, we were informed that the carry-on luggage size measurement standards was different there than what they were in the United States. They were slightly smaller, so several of the guys' carry-ons were actually too big to carry onto the plane. As a result, they ended up having to go ahead and check their carry-ons, which was I guess a minor annoyance, but still something to consider that it's not universal everywhere you go. Then when we were returning from that trip, I'll never forget our bass player that was with us, a fellow by the name of Scott. He had taken a very nice 35mm camera on the trip. He had taken a bunch of pictures. I want to say he had something like 10 or 12 rolls of film with him. Generally, they would not force you to put that film through the x-ray machine. Obviously, exposing it to x-rays is likely going to ruin the film. Usually, they would let you just hand them the film and they could visually and physically inspect it, not put it through the x-ray machine. They insisted on putting all of his film through the x-ray machine. I don't remember for sure now, but to the best of my recollection, most of the pictures turned out. I think he did lose some of that film and some of those shots, but I can't really remember for sure. Obviously, it's not real common for people to be traveling with film these days, but that is something to consider if you do want to take a 35mm camera per se and just go old school, take some really good photographs. You might want to consider that and a way to protect that film and do a little bit of research before you do that. So now let's move on into continental Europe. I remember another trip going in to play a big music festival in southern France. We had flown into Paris, I believe, and from Paris on to Lyon, France. On the way in, we had a rather unique set of circumstances occur. Inside the airport was also a train station, and of course they had the escalator skywalk thing. I don't know exactly what you call it. It's the escalator. It doesn't go up and down. It's just level. But to get from one end of this long concourse to the other, I remember we were all on this thing. We're riding it down. Our ride was waiting for us to take us on a 2-hour drive over to the city we'd actually be staying in. We were trying to hurry up, get there, board the bus, and get on down the road. Well, as we're riding along, our bass player on that trip was standing right behind me, and he had a flight case for his bass there. He was holding a case beside him like this, lengthwise. The interior on the rails of the escalator were made out of glass. And of course you had the the rubber part, the handrail that moves with you. Well, just as we were reaching the end of that, somebody behind him said something. He turned back to answer him, and when he did, he turned his bass just slightly, and it was just enough for it to catch at the end of the handrail. He continued moving forward, pressed up against his case, pushed the end of the case into the glass on the handrail of the escalator, and a whole pane of that glass literally exploded. Glass went everywhere, out across the concourse area. It sounded like a shotgun went off in this big open area that we were in. Well, at that point, we didn't really know what to do. He definitely didn't know what to do. He was afraid of getting in trouble. We started trying to look for somebody, an authority of some kind, but we hadn't seen anybody since we had left the baggage area, which was quite a ways behind us. And as I said, we had a ride waiting on us. We were on a tight schedule, and we had to get on down the road. So we waited for a few moments, looked around, seeing if we could find anybody. We really never found anyone, and Basically, we just reached a point like we had to go. There was nothing else that we could really do about it. Of course, we didn't have a phone or anything handy where we could try to contact somebody there at the airport to let them know what had happened. So we went ahead and left, got on the bus, headed on down the road to our destination. Of course, about a week later, when we went to fly home, we came back through the same area, and at that point, they had a piece of plywood there and some caution tape around it and everything, and it had been cleaned up, obviously. And the poor guy, he was a little bit nervous about it. He said, what if they have security footage of me, when this happened, and they might just be waiting on me when I get back or what have you. Nobody ever said anything, and neither did we at that point. We figured no harm, no foul. It was what it was. So another time, I remember we were going to play that same festival. It was actually the first time that I was at that festival. I've been there multiple times. And it was with a lot of Texas music artists who had not been to Europe before. It was their first trip. Guys like Cross Canadian Ragweed, Randy Rogers, Jason Boland, and I was traveling with Kevin Fowler at the time. So anyway, a bunch of us got to go over and do this festival. It was great. It was amazing. We had about 30,000 people all out spread on the side of this mountain. Just absolutely gorgeous. It was an awesome gig. We had a great time. But the day that we all arrived, everybody, of course, was jet lagged, a little tired, and looking to just kind of blow off some steam, relax, and get a good night's sleep so that we would be good for something the next day. And some of the guys wanted to go out and see if they could find a place to have a drink or two and just unwind a little bit. I went ahead and went with everyone. We walked down the street a little ways and found a little bar. It's called the Surf Bar. I'll never forget. They had sand on the floor. It was a really cool place. And I wasn't there for very long. I was really, really tired. And I decided to go back to our room and try to get a little bit of rest. So I get back to the room. I put my little mask on from my flight over and put my earplugs in. And I had just dozed off. And, of course, I had a couple of roommates on that trip. There's 3 beds in that particular room. And for those of y'all who don't realize it, air conditioning and refrigeration is not really popular in Europe. And this hotel that we were staying in only had a very few rooms that had any kind of air conditioning. This was in the middle of summer. It got up to 100 degrees during the day. So for me, I was having a hard time trying to sleep. Of course, everybody had their windows open to try to catch a breeze. And we're in a very old city. These buildings are several hundred years old. They're all stone and brick and 3 stories high, and with cobblestone streets that are very, very narrow. So as you can imagine, sound traveled like crazy down these streets. I woke up probably around midnight or so. In this town, everything pretty much started slowing down, and the sidewalks rolled up when the sun went down. So there wasn't a lot of people out or anything like that. But I woke up to somebody playing with my foot, and only to realize that the whole group had come back from this little bar together, and everybody was pretty well buzzed, let's say. And just being loud and really and honestly acting kind of like everybody did when we were back home out on the road, just having a good time and trying to get a jam session together. They were in my room for a short period of time. Everybody left and went to somebody else's room to start playing music. I went ahead and went back to sleep. So the next morning I found out that apparently in the course of all that, we had enraged the hotel manager as well as some people who lived nearby the hotel because of all the racket with the windows open. Apparently you could hear us, you could hear everybody up and down the street outside, and kept a few people awake. The hotel manager, the night manager, threatened to call the police on us, and it was just a big deal. So the next morning we got notice that we had to go have a meeting with the U.S. consulate. Of course, we were a little bit nervous as we were getting called into the principal's office, and we hadn't even been there for 24 hours, and we were already in trouble. But backing up a little bit, this was during an election year. This was in 2004, and just to give you an idea, things weren't real great, politically speaking, between the United States and France over the war in the Middle East and some things like that. And, of course, we were from Texas. President Bush was from Texas. Of course, we were all essentially apolitical, but everywhere we went, people wanted to know who we supported in that election. And it was a big deal to people in other countries. We were all kind of surprised by how much people were paying attention and how much they cared and how interested they were in our opinion about it. It was an interesting situation. So we show up at the U.S. consulate's office. We go in not knowing what to expect. And much to our surprise, the U.S. consulate stationed there was actually from Austin. She said, guys, I get it. I understand. I'm from Austin myself. I love live music. I know how it is, but I need you guys to be on your best behavior. You cannot be making a lot of noise. You can't be up late at night making a lot of noise. I know y'all wanted to sit and play music, but it's not a good idea. And she said, went on to tell us, with the way things were between the United States and France at that point, she did say that if the press got wind of it, knowing that we were from Texas, these bunch of loud, obnoxious musicians keeping people up late at night, that we would have press crawling all over us, which we were shocked by. We didn't really figure anybody would care what we were up to, but it was one of those instances. As I talked about in that first video, people are generally a little bit more reserved in other countries. So, you kind of you lay back a little bit. Don't get too carried away. And, of course, by all means, have a great time, but be safe and be wise about it and read the room, I guess you could say. You don't want to be that guy that gets called into the principal's office like we were. So I want to talk a little bit about the Middle East. And when we went to Iraq, of course, we flew into Kuwait City commercially. That was a really unique experience. Shortly after we arrived, we were taken to our hotel. It was a very, very nice hotel there on the Persian Gulf. It was beautiful, beautiful beaches. The water was gorgeous. And even though I had been in transit for the better part of 50 hours at that point, and I was completely exhausted, I couldn't wait to get checked into my room, put on some swim trunks, head downstairs, run out on the beach, and I just wanted to be able to say that I swam in the Persian Gulf. Well, as soon as I got out there, I got to looking out across the water, and I saw this line of ships moving through the Gulf out there. And as I looked closer, I realized that they were what appeared to be U.S. Navy ships moving to the north through the Gulf. I thought, well, that's strange. Okay, so not something you see every day. After I finished swimming, I went back inside, went up to my room, and I changed clothes, flopped down on the bed, turned on the TV, and the first thing I saw in there, apparently, that there had been an issue where the Iranian government had actually seized, I believe it was some British soldiers. They had stopped I think it was a merchant ship. I don't remember exactly the details on it, but the ships that I saw traveling through the Persian Gulf headed north at that point was actually a U.S. Navy armada headed into the area. And we were later told when we visited with our military liaisons later in that day, they warned us that they didn't know how that situation was going to end up. And they said it's a very good possibility that if some kind of fight breaks out with that, we very well could be basically stuck there for an indefinite period of time before we'd be able to return to the United States. So they just wanted to prepare us for that. I remember after we came back out of Iraq, we traveled back to Kuwait City, spent the night there, and then flew out the next morning to head back to the United States. On that trip, we actually had 15 people in total on that tour as we traveled through Iraq. Of course, we had the band, two different artists. We had put together kind of a throw-together band, half one guy's band, half the other guy's band. So in addition to that, we also brought our business manager as well as an embedded reporter. The editor-in-chief of Texas Music Monthly magazine came to do a featured article on our trip over there. And in addition to that, we also picked up a local sound crew there in Kuwait. So that was another 5 individuals there. So total, we had 15 people. It was a pretty large group that we were traveling with. Before we returned to Kuwait City, we talked to the guy who headed up that sound crew. He was a local Kuwaiti. He was born and raised there. A very nice man. And we asked him, we said, where would you take your family to eat for a nice dinner? Where would you go? Said, we would really like to go to dinner once we get back into Kuwait and we want to experience it like a local. We want to go to a nice restaurant. So he told us, he goes, absolutely, I will take y'all to my favorite place in town. It's a great place to eat, and it'll be a wonderful experience. The thing about that was we weren't actually supposed to go anywhere without our military liaison, who was a full bird colonel from the Pentagon, along with us to babysit us, and we also had 2 private security men that traveled with us as well. By the time we had gotten back to Kuwait City, he realized that we were daredevils and we were up for just about anything. And I think, quite honestly, he was just tired of dealing with us. So he's like, I don't know anything. I'm going to bed. Anyhow, we got a call from the sound man a little later in the day saying that something had come up and he wasn't able to go with us. But he told us the name of the restaurant. He told us how to call a cab and what we needed to do to get a ride over to where this restaurant was. And Kuwait City, for those of y'all who don't know much about it, is absolutely gorgeous. It looks like Miami. It's very westernized. Nearly all the signs that I saw were double-sided. They would be both in Arabic and in English. So it was really a neat town. It's a beautiful town, beautiful beaches, palm trees, just a really nice place. So we went ahead and called a cab. They picked us up. We get on the road, and people drive kind of crazy in those countries. So we were screaming across Kuwait City on the freeway, going 85, 90 miles an hour. The guy was running up on the bumper of other vehicles and honking his horn, cutting people off in traffic, and it was just we were beginning to doubt whether or not we were going to live to make it back to the hotel at that point. And it was quite a ride. We rode most of the way across Kuwait City to this restaurant that our friend had recommended to us, and we got there, and it was a wonderful experience once we made it, and we had a wonderful dinner. I remember I actually had an ostrich steak, which oddly enough, the only way I can explain it, if you know what a new pair of ostrich boots smell like, the steak kind of tasted like those boots smell, but not in a bad way. It was really good. But I know it's a weird analogy, but that's really the only way I could put it. So then after that, we called a cab again to take us back to the hotel, and yet again, it was a hair-raising, screaming trip back across Kuwait City, tailgating people and cutting people off and all sorts of craziness when we got back. And another little thing about that, when we were waiting downstairs for the cabs to show up and pick us up, it was kind of interesting. At the hotel, they had these big posts that came up out of the driveway to block the road there with security checkpoints. So any vehicle that came in, they would make them stop, come out with the little mirror on the wheel with a handle on it, and walk around and check underneath the vehicle, make them pop the trunk and pop the hood and just look the vehicle over. They had dogs down there and everything just to make sure that there wasn't a bomb in it or something like that. And as I was standing there waiting for the cab to show up, there was a police vehicle with lights and siren on, pulled up and started yelping the siren. These guys running around like mad. They hurriedly dropped those bars and opened the gate. Police cars pull on through, followed by an SUV, and then behind that was a beautiful white Rolls Royce. And out on the fenders, it had the Kuwaiti flag on each fender. This Rolls Royce pulled up right in front of me, right there at the door of the hotel, and the driver jumped out, ran around, opened the back door of the car, and lo and behold, I didn't know it at the time, but I later found out it was the Crown Prince of Kuwait actually got out of the car and walked into the hotel. He was there for a banquet that they were having that night, and he actually spent the night in the hotel and stayed on the same floor as us. It was really interesting because, of course, they had security posted everywhere. I'm assuming that they probably had vetted us, even though we weren't aware of it, because getting on and off the elevator that evening, the security guys would just smile and nod and were very polite. They never said anything to us. I'm assuming that they probably knew who we were with, and what rooms we were staying in, just for security purposes. This time I want to talk a little bit about a former Soviet bloc country there, just north of Afghanistan, the country of Kyrgyzstan, the Kyrgyz Republic. We flew into the capital city, which is Bishkek, and at that time the United States military had a very large base that they transitioned troops into and out of Afghanistan, and it was a great place for R&R. So the troops would spend a couple of weeks there once they left Afghanistan, just so that they could kind of decompress before getting on the plane and flying home. So they had a lot of recreational activities available there, from ping pong, internet cafes, a small, basically like a bar. They weren't allowed to drink, but there were very tight controls. They were only allowed to drink a little bit. They could only be served a couple of drinks in a 24-hour time period. I actually got to ring in the new year on that trip there, going into 2009 at Manas Air Base. But the whole thing was very interesting. The air base was built right next to the Bishkek International Airport, and the U.S. military and the locals shared that airport. So it was kind of an interesting little dynamic that they had going on there. And leaving the international airport side and transitioning into the Manas Air Base was very, very interesting because there was a little space there that was just essentially a no man's land. They had about 100-yard space. It had concrete barriers and gates on each end of it with machine gun nests with 50 caliber machine guns. Kyrgyz on one side had their guns pointed towards the U.S. military, and the U.S. military had their machine guns pointed at the Kyrgyz side. You had to be cleared from both sides to transit that area to go from one side to the other without being shot. And of course there were these little signs here. I'll put a picture in so you can check that out, saying runners go no further. It was what they called a kill zone. If you wandered into that on foot, as we were told, you would be shot, no questions asked. So that was a little bit of an interesting experience to see that. I talked a little bit in my last video about having to bribe the baggage handlers and the customs officials to get out of that country when we were headed home. To give you a little bit more information on that, like I said, we had been warned ahead of time before we departed that we might have some issues like that. The band that had been in just before us, I think they had just left about a week before we arrived, had brought quite a bit of gear with them, probably more gear than what they should have brought. And just so you know, on that trip, we actually went as a three-piece with a very small little PA on a stick so that we could get in the Black Hawk helicopters and go out to those FOBs that do not actually have a runway. Their only way in and out is by helicopter. You couldn't land a fixed-wing aircraft there. So that was our idea, was to go as very scaled-down, kind of acoustic three-piece with a small PA, so we could hop on a couple of Black Hawks and go out and hit these FOBs that nobody, as far as entertainer-wise, ever went to. So fortunately, we didn't have a whole lot of stuff with us, but we had enough. Anyway, back to this band that had been there before us, that we were told that whenever those guys went to leave, they were told that they owed $34,000 in baggage overages. Of course, you know, at that point, even with the might and the funds of the United States government behind you, that's absurd. Nobody is going to pay $34,000 for their baggage. So at that point, they simply kind of reached out to their liaison officer there at Manas Air Base. He came back over, picked up the majority of their gear, took it back to the base. Those guys went ahead and flew home. They put their gear on an outbound C-17 or C-130, what have you, and flew it back to the States in a military transport, which we actually, just to hedge our bets, we did that with a few pieces of our gear, stuff that we knew we wouldn't need right away, because obviously they're not going to make a special flight just to bring your stuff back to you. Yeah, I believe the stuff that we left behind, it took us about a month to 6 weeks before it actually finally made it back to Texas and we got our stuff back. It wasn't a big deal, like I said. We just we chose wisely and made sure it was stuff that we wasn't going to need as soon as we returned. Anyway, I hope these examples kind of illustrate some of the things that I hit on in my last video and some of the stuff that I talked about. You know, like I said, you need to keep your head on a swivel, be a little reserved, and pay attention. And also be prepared for things to not go as planned. They just, as Jimmy Doolittle said, something to the effect of he found planning indispensable and plans useless. So you hope for the best and prepare for the worst. And I always tell people that. And when things don't go as planned, be flexible. Just roll with it. That's all you really can do in a situation like that. As always, if you need some fiddle tracks, some violin, some strings, mandolin, anything like that recorded, please let me know. I'd love to work with you on that. And also, of course, if you're interested in violin or fiddle lessons, let me know. We can do those remotely, work around your schedule, and make it real easy like that. As always, please like, subscribe, and share. I'm so thankful for all of you that have watched these videos and offered me a little bit of feedback on these videos and give me some ideas of some things to talk about. It's been and very encouraging. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, a wonderful week, and keep on picking. Ba-da-doo-bow. rubber bump.